Well, hello out there, everybody. It's time for another edition of the Live from the Heartland show. And I'm Michael James. I'm here in the great city of Chicago, where we are going to bring you number 149 of the Live from the Heartland show, the number starting when the pandemic began. So this is for the week of April 22nd. And we're going to spend most of the show, after I do a little bit of banter, talking with a couple of old friends and catching up with them. One of them would be Orrin Williams, who knows an awful lot about urban agriculture. And the other is the wonderful performer and singer, Jamie O'Reilly. So stay tuned for a little bit of conversation with some really interesting people. This week, some good things that happened for me is I went into the pool, but I also went up in the weight room for the first time in a while, and that felt really good. I did go to the Golden Gloves out in Cicero last Thursday night with my friend Randy Cummins, the great massage therapist and a pal of his. And I did spend a little time yesterday while I was waiting for my wife in the doctor's office to go over to Diversey Harbor and hang out and watch all kind of birds and people running by, etc. There was a woman who showed up and she looked a little rough-edged, and she was feeding first the pigeons, then came the ducks, then came the geese. It was like a massive gathering of birds. And this woman, when she was finished throwing out the food, she walked over by the garbage can, and then she went in the passenger side of a very slick sports car, a beautiful red, I don't know what it was, and drove away. She was doing good in the world in her way. And I did see an elderly woman walking around in my neighborhood picking up cigarette butts and trash. She had a little clamper thing. You reach down, you get it. So there's some people who are out there just doing some stuff. Moving right along, we're still really rejoicing in the election of our new mayor-to-be, Brandon Johnson. Today, he's down in Springfield, making good, I guess, with state reps and senators. He has announced his leadership team, and one of them includes Amisha Patel, former executive director of Grassroots Collaborative and Grassroots Illinois Action. She was recently a guest on the show, and like all of our earlier shows, you can find them at youtube.com/Heartland Media, also Spotify, Google, all that kind of thing. But Amisha gave us a lot of insights into the incoming new mayor. She's been a longtime organizer, and we're really glad that she is going to be involved around the new mayor because he has a lot on his plate, and we have a lot of hope and great expectations. Okay, we talk a lot on this show over the years about the importance of grassroots organizing, of community organizing, of talking to people, helping them go through changes, raising questions, etc. And when it comes to electoral politics, we talk about the ground game. And clearly, Johnson had the ground game here in the most recent mayoral election in Chicago, whereas Vallis apparently had a lot of money, but he didn't have the people on the ground. You know, on this show, we talk a lot about getting out there, organizing face-to-face with people, the ground game when it comes to electoral politics. And most recently, I was talking to Kathy Steichen of the Uri Eichen Gallery, also an AFSCME, that's the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. She's an organizer for that union. We talked about victories on a lower level, so to speak. I'm not mayor, governor, senator, but like school boards. And she sent me a couple of things. In Sterling, Illinois, workers at the CGH Medical Center have been locked in a protracted fight over a contract with an aggressive anti-union campaign by the hospital leadership. An AFSCME activist helped secure a solid win for Diana Merdian, Merdian, a new mayor who can hold the hospital management accountable. She also pointed out in Niles, Maine, AFSCME backed the diverse coalition of library board candidates who oppose the incumbent library board members whose main goal has been to defund library service and block the members from their efforts to win a fair contract. All four of those kind of candidates won. Back here in Chicago, where there's a lot of labor activity always, the faculty and staff at Governor's State University returned to work on Tuesday, the 18th, after reaching a tentative agreement with the administration on a 3-year contract ending a 5-day strike. That's some good news. Tragedies for the week. Well, There's still a war in Ukraine. There's a war going on in the Sudan. There's turmoil in Israel. And here on the home front in the United States, there's been terrible gun violence. People were shot and killed in Louisville, Kentucky, in Alabama, and a young fellow named Ralph Yari was wounded when he went to the wrong house to pick up his younger brothers. He was shot in the face and had another shot in his body, and we don't know his condition, but he is back at home. On another terrible note with people with guns, a young woman named Kaylin Gillis was killed in New York State when the car she was riding in pulled into a driveway, a mistaken driveway, not where they wanted to go, were turning around when she was shot and killed. She was a passenger in the car. And Mayor Daniel Biss up in Evanston, who has been on the show, and he sends out a newsletter, and he had a lot of details about a shooting on a beach up in Evanston. A couple of people, I believe, were killed. The gun thing is out of control, and some people may think they protect themselves with guns, but there are a lot of accidents, and we are reaping the ramifications of all of these guns. Okay, on a comebacks. So maybe a comeback to the death penalty in a lot of places. We have a situation in Florida where Governor DeSantis, who is a very dangerous person and someone we should watch carefully, he just signed a bill allowing divided juries to hand down death sentences. AOL also reports that there was a Yahoo poll that says Trump's big poll bounce after the indictment is fading fast. The former president's lead over Florida Governor DeSantis in the Republican primary has shrunk 10 points since March, according to this new poll by Yahoo. And the Washington Post has reported, just as we are recording this show, that Florida is expanding the ban on lessons about gender identity and sexuality to all school children through the 12th grade. You know, I don't understand where these people are at. And in the courts, Trump is on trial in New York City. Fox has settled with Dominion for many millions of dollars. An alternate is reporting that 6 years after white supremacists descended on the University of Virginia with tiki torches, there are some felony indictments coming down. And that includes indictments have been unsealed Tuesday for 3 defendants who were extradited from their home states. A guy named Tyler Bradley Dykes of Bluffton, South Carolina. I've been there. Dallas Medina of Ravinia, Ohio, and Will Zachary Smith in Nakona, Texas. The rioters apparently are being charged with 6 felonies, which carry up to 5 years in prison. And on a sad note, Ahmad Jamal, the wonderful, great pianist who lived in Chicago for a long time, has died at 62. And in case you missed it, this follows the death of the jazz giant Harrison Bankhead here in Chicago last week. A little bit of travel news for everybody who really wants to get out and about here in the great state of Illinois. I get a newsletter from Only in Your State, and it's only in Illinois. It's called newsletter at onlyinyourstate.com. What they did is they said, blink and you'll miss 5 tiny restaurants, including the Track Inn in Chillicothe, about 3 hours from Chicago. And for those of us who are driving around, need a good place to eat, this is a good website, Only in Illinois. Once again, newsletter at onlyinyourstate.com. Announcements. I'm still waiting for a warm, sunny Sunday when it reaches 60 degrees. I hope that will happen next week. That would be April 30th. And I'm announcing now that I will open the Prairie Dancer Gallery on my front porch at 1509 West Lunt, weather permitting. Okay, last week we had Don Rose talking about the mayoral election and my cousin Adam James talking film and sport. Both of those interviews can be seen if you go to youtube.com/Heartland Media. All right, we're going to be right back with our first guest, the one and only Orrin Williams. We're going to talk urban agriculture, so stay tuned here on the left end of your dial. 88.7 FM, WLUW.org. And at the end of the show, we'll tell you all the other ways you can get the show. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back to this edition of the Live from the Heartland show. This is Michael James. We are recording on the 19th of April. The show is for the week of April 22nd. And like I said at the top of the hour, We're going to catch up with some old friends today, and one of them is Orrin Williams. And we met a long time ago, back in the 60s, but I've got to know him while we had the Heartland Cafe. And the way, I had grown up working on some farms. There were farms in my town down the road. Our family had gardens. I was in the 4-H club, and I've always been interested in kind of urban agriculture. When we started the Heartland Cafe, we had read Francis Lapay Moore about how we feed the planet. And this guy, Orrin Williams, shows up, and he is a football coach at that time at Northeastern Illinois. That piqued my interest, and we got to know him, and we've run into each other every once in a while. Back in 2010, he was on this show for a long time, and you can get that at YouTube. So that's enough talking. Let's say hello to Orrin. How are you, brother?
I'm good, Mike. How are you, my brother?
Good. Did I leave anything out about?
Nah, if you try to get everything in, you take up the whole show. So,
well, we're going to talk a little bit about agriculture and stuff, but I've always considered myself an organizer, and I know you're an organizer. And one of the things I like to do on the show, which I do in my class at DePaul, is share people's life as an organizer, how they got into being an organizer, where they come from. So tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into some deep detail on growing vegetables in Chicago.
All right. Well, I think I passed across, like you said, back in the 60s. And at one point, late 60s until 1970 or so, when I wound up going in the Air Force, I was the chairman of the Black Student Union at Wright College, and had the pleasure to bring in folks like Fred Hampton Sr. and Cha-Cha and that whole crew for an event that we did, and got to exchange ideas with those folks back in those days. So that got me interested, and of course went in the military, and that was an interesting part of my life. You talk about love, hate, I wasn't the greatest soldier in the world, as you can imagine, but I did get to go to Thailand, where I spent almost 2 years, and kind of blew my mind open, right, about what the world was like and who was in it, and rice paddies and people farming and water buffaloes and all that stuff, right? South Side kid from Chicago, thinking everything in Asia is Chinese, right? And everybody eats Chinese food, only to find out completely, utterly false, untrue. The world is a complicated place. And one experience that I had while I was there that I haven't talked to many people about, but we used to get this paper on the base called Stars and Stripes. It was for, the military guys. But during that time, we got this particular issue. In Thailand, there was serious riots and disorder because of the rice prices going up, right? And there was a contrived rice shortage. And the Stars and Stripes had an article in it about how Thailand had its biggest, best bumper crop ever. So you can see how they contrived the shortage while exporting as much rice as they could and making as much money as they could, right? And then also just being in that milieu and watching how people operate in the world and how they fed themselves, that stuck with me. Then when I was at Northeastern, I coached football, but also ran the recreation and intramural sports program. But in a space like Northeastern, really intimate campus, you knew everybody, had a lot of great conversations with folks. But also I grew up in Inglewood, 300 block west of 60th Place. And so if you go there now, there are no houses left on the side of the street I lived on. There may be 5 or 6 houses left from the time I grew up. There was no vacant lots on our block. But that got me interested in, so why do we have this vacant land? What can we do? And I thought a great idea would be to grow food, but I didn't know anything about soil contamination or soil quality or any of that stuff. I just thought it was a good idea and a good way to use land. And, you know, having a great grandmother, at least, that lived in Pensacola, Florida, which is kind of a city, you know, it's not the biggest city anywhere, but she had chickens and she grew stuff. And, you know, so all of that came together for me. But for the long time, I was the crazy uncle in the attic, right? What do you mean grow food and, you know, in Chicago in a vacant lot? So now, you know, pushing forward to now, we have a proof of concept. We know we can do this. There's great organizations. There's Growing Home, who I worked for a few years. There's Urban Growers Collective, operated by Will Allen's daughter. And Will had Growing Power up in Milwaukee. You've got Sweetwater Foundation. You've got a number of folks doing stuff here in the city and doing great stuff. But for me now, the real challenge is to create eaters, right? We have a population that is rooted in a food system and in a food environment that's controlled by corporations. And so we have people who are addicted, if you will, to fast food and Uber Eats and all that stuff, right? We don't have any Heartlands left, right? We've got Majani here on the South Side. We got a couple of other restaurants that do good stuff. And Chef Sadakia at Majani, I know he does a lot in terms of buying his produce from local farmers and that kind of stuff. But few people cook, mostly elders cook. And we see the results of what's happened. What is it? 88% of us have at least one metabolic disorder. So only 12%
of all people?
The population in this country, right? Only 12% of us are metabolically healthy. And so a lot of that, you can look at diet and what we eat and how we eat has a huge impact on that number. Of course, there's other things I won't get into now, but my thing now is getting people to eat fruits and vegetables again, getting people to think about what they drink, think about what they eat, think about how they can participate again in eating and drinking, you know, in a healthier way. I won't even try to describe what's a healthy diet or any of that, but that's my main goal. And the other projects that I'm working on now, I work with Chicago Grows Food, which is a coalition of groups that include like Gardeneers, Stein Learning Garden in St. Sabina. I don't want to leave anybody out. Howard Rosing at DePaul, Saria Lofton at UIC. You know, different organizations, different folks. And so we've done a lot with fabric grow bags and trying to get people interested in and teaching them about the possibilities for home gardening. So we really want to dive into that space. And last year we installed about 50 home gardens. And this year we are on the path to do that again. We have other organizations like Grow Greater Inglewood, which are also doing home backyard projects. They mostly install raised beds, but we use the fabric grow bag as the framework for our programs.
Say that again. What do you call this bag? The fabric
grow bag. And they come in sizes between 1 gallon up to 200 gallons, right? So our default size is a 5-gallon grow bag, and you can grow a lot of stuff. I mean, you know,
before we go into all that, let me ask a couple of things. So you're the executive director of the Center for Urban Transformation in Chicago.
Correct.
And what led you to that job? The last thing you were doing when you were at Northeastern, you were running the intramural program, you were doing some coaching. What got you into the agriculture And then what does the Center for Urban Transformation do exactly in promoting backyard garden growing?
Well, I mean, for me, it's just the work we do. Whether I'm at UIC doing my job there or the Center for Urban, it's all one thing to me.
All right. So you have a whole network now of people who are really working on urban gardening.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
you
and
can
we
see it
still
when you drive around
interface.
town. You can see some of these sometimes lots and a lot of planting going on. Talk a little more about that. That sounds like a great projects.
No, I mean, it's in its infancy. We also, with our Chicago's food partners, because of the pandemic, we created a curriculum at UIC with Marjorie Kirsten, who was at the Y at that time, and now she's a PhD candidate at UIC. And we created a curriculum about how to grow using the grow bags.
Has the city been involved in any way? Are they helpful? Do you get some empty lots? Is there any money? What
No.
are your demands for our new mayor?
Well, I mean, to be supportive, particularly of the urban gardening community, making sure they get water, making sure they get the support that they need, making sure that they have a right to entry for different sites, making sure they get assistance in cleaning up and decontaminating sites and all that stuff. That would be a great boon. Of course, supporting community gardeners as well, and connecting with entities like Neighbor Space to make sure that community gardens can get the fencing they need, making sure that they can get water access on their lots. I mean, all that kind of stuff is vital. And also, these politicians get caught up in all kinds of stuff. I'm not quite sure what they think or what they know about what's going on in the world, but we have to make sure that we have food access that's nearby. In terms of Illinois, in terms of the city, in terms of right out our back door.
What's the situation? What's the situation with access to food? We hear about food deserts. We hear like Walmart's closing 3 stores, more than 3, but 3 in what they call underserved neighborhoods, or we do, poor neighborhood in the hood. What's the status of that? We had Whole Foods for a while, I think on the south side or the west side, and then it closed up. Are there any good news things on big companies and providing food in neighborhoods, or are we really at ground zero here?
We're at ground zero. We always were, right? And the things like Whole Foods in Inglewood, that was a one-off. It's not something, I mean, I supported the people in the community that wanted to do it, the people that worked on the project, but I never thought it was a good idea. I thought that the site that store occupied, number one on my list would have been a Black-owned grocer. And if we couldn't do that, I was interested in a locally owned entity like Pete's Fresh Market or whatever the case may be. That didn't happen. We've seen this process, and now the community is unhappy with the replacement of Whole Foods. There was a lot that I didn't like about the site. It wasn't really big enough. So it was a miniature version of Whole Foods, if you will. There's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but I knew that it probably was not going to be something that was a long-term solution. We have worked with Inner City Muslim Action Network, and there's the Go Green on Racine, little grocery store there on 63rd and Racine. So one of the things we like to see happen is a greater return to what I call community and neighborhood sized grocers. You and I are old enough to remember when you had the A&P or you had the Jewel, and essentially it was a little bigger storefront than the corner store, but it was walkable. You could walk to 59th Street in the A&P. And then on that corner of 59th and Wentworth, when I was growing up, you had the people that sold live poultry, so your mom would send you to get a chicken. And then, you'd go to the A&P to get some celery or whatever else the case may be. I'd like to see a return to that, but the corporations have colonized the space, if you will.
Orrin, one of the things you brought up was getting people to eat better. And, I eat a lot of vegetables. I eat a lot of chicken. I do a lot of oatmeal, et cetera, et cetera. But, I do have a taste for the sweet and the fast food and all that, and have been very good at resisting them. But how do you, as someone who is a proponent of people eating good and not only eating well, but growing their food, how do we make steps to get kids to like food better? I know there's some efforts in schools to provide better food and all that. It seems like a big battle, though.
Well, it is. Battle. It is. But, that's what I love about working at USC, Chicago Partnership for Health Promotion, which is a program out of the Office of Community Engagement, Neighborhood Health Partnerships. So that's what our team does. In fact, we've got interventions that include schools, that include pre-K, daycare folks, that includes working with corner stores, that includes working with pantries and doing all of this work. So that's what it's really about. My team, I have a 2-person team. It's 3 of us, but Miriam Verto, who teaches classes like Cooking Matters and Veggie RX, which is a prescription program for people that have been diagnosed with a metabolic disorder like diabetes. And so she works with clinics like with Inner City Muslim Action Network, and she goes in and she teaches people how to cook and how to use the produce that is available with the prescription box that they get. So she does programs on Facebook Live. She shows up in these different communities and in clinics to teach people how to cook. And then I have Tracy Williams, who started recently, but she's certified yoga instructor. She will be teaching along with Miriam Cooking Matters, those kinds of things. This year we'll be working a lot with the farm stands, like at Urban Growers Collective and at Growing Home. And so our teams will show up and they do cooking demos and they do nutrition classes and they do all that stuff. And that's also what we're doing with the home garden stuff. So we actually want to take it to the block, as we say, and our team will come in to the home garden. We just ask you to have your neighbors come, your grandma come, your auntie come, whatever the case may be, and we'll spend some time with you and we'll do nutrition classes and we'll do cooking demos and we'll do all that kind of stuff. So that's our kind of contribution to it. And there's other organizations, of course, that do a lot of good work with respect to that as well.
Orrin, do you see an expansion of these community gardens over the last few years? Are there more? Is it really starting to happen?
Oh, yeah, it really is. People are getting, more exposure to them. People are beginning to realize the importance of them. School gardens are expanding. I mean, all of that. So you've got Michelle Newman Brooks with CPS and her team. And so there's a big expansion of school gardens, and all of us work together too, which is gratifying.
Well, this is good. You and I talked about getting together a little bit and giving me some advice on my own backyard, as well as driving around the city and looking at some of your projects. So we're going to do that.
Absolutely.
I want to thank you. You want to give people a way they can get a hold of you if they want to explore some of this a little further with you? Got an email or something?
Oh, yeah. It's ORRINW at UIC.edu. ORRINW, Orrin W at UIC.edu.
Well, you're a hell of a guy, and I'm really glad that we got to check in with each other, and we both have said we're going to get together, so let's do it.
Yeah, the weather's getting warm, man. Come on out.
Right on. Okay,
All right.
brother, keep doing good in the world.
You too, Mike. Appreciate everything you've done and that you're continuing to do.
All right, thank you.
See you soon.
Everybody else, stay tuned for more Live from the Heartland. We'll be back with Jamie O'Reilly in just a minute. And once again, thank you, Orrin Williams. Hasta luego, buena suerte. Eat well.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
All right. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. Stay tuned here to WLUW 88.7 or wherever you're getting Live from the Heartland. We'll be right back. Hey, we're back with more Live from the Heartland for the week of April 22nd. I'm Michael James. And my next guest is someone who I also got to know while we ran the Heartland Cafe up there at the corner of Glenwood and Lunt for 36 years. That would be Jamie O'Reilly. And I first met someone from her family. I met her brother, Bo, when I bought the first sound system for the Heartland Cafe. He had a club or a place out in DeKalb. And I remember going out there, meeting him and getting some speakers, amplifier, etc. Jamie, you come from a long line of performers. Your family's been very much involved, not only in the arts, but also in some politics, newspapers, etc. here in Chicago. I'm really glad that you're coming on the show. I love your voice. I've been listening to your music. And why don't we start by you telling us what was that song we just heard?
Sanctuary City is a song that was written for me when a person who we will not name was in office and our city was targeted. And I believe this song was written by Ann Hills, who's my best friend, the folk singer, and Al.
Oh, yeah.
And she recast Chicago not as the city of big shoulders, but as a woman, as embracing the people. I just get the shivers thinking about it. It's a stunning song. And it really lays out what we're about, what our history is about, and why it's important to be a welcoming place. So, yeah, very nice song. Love that song.
Well, good. And tell us a little bit about yourself. And I know that we're going to talk about your family, so you can lead into that. I kind of want to know how you got into being an artist performer and a little bit about your family, that gave you all that support and genes, et cetera, that turned you out to be what you are.
Well, of the 14 of us, I'm number 9 in the family. And I chose to be a folk singer. After college, I went to DePaul School of Music and I learned classical music. And my voice teacher at the time said there was something about my voice that would be suited for Irish music. But also, Michael, it was that I had a really great college professor who taught us a class called Feast or Famine. And it just opened my eyes to the world, as a great teacher will do. And I just became very interested in multiculturalism and in ethnic music and ethnic forms. So I just started putting that together. And, I do songs of the Spanish Civil War and I do songs of the turn of the century. And that's kind of was my start in the early 80s. I've done a fair amount of activism. But this latest show is actually me choosing to make the argument that people that come from a vocal tradition, a musical tradition that's about parlor songs and songs like that are just as, quote, traditionally acceptable in our history as a fiddle player. You'll find that grant organizations and such really kind of look past this great tradition of the Irish orator and the singing tradition. And it was important for me to show that now that I've done the research with my grandchildren, this is the eighth generation of singers and activists that I've been able to trace. And that's what the show is going to talk about, especially the early 1900 incredible period in Chicago that we called the Renaissance, that for which several of my great aunts and uncles and grandfather were part of.
Well, what is this show called?
The show's called In Old Chicago.
And I think I heard you talking about it on our sister station on the Northwestern station.
With Kathy Kelly, right?
Yeah.
And it's grown to be a project I'm calling the Voices of Old Chicago Legacy Project, because this is a period of time where a great deal of families are interested in genealogy and And so I am interested in pointing out to people how valuable their artifacts and ancestry is to them and to their children. And I'm setting up a model of that with the show that I'm doing.
This show will be, where are you going to put the show on? Do you have that figured out?
We have a showcase coming up on April 29th at Rare Nest Gallery in Avondale. And the host and gallery owner is the art historian Keith Bringy, who has a fair amount of connections around town. And we also are going to be performing it as part of the WFMT 70th anniversary concert in May and performing it in Woodstock. And then we'll be bringing it to you, to various museums and such and theaters, because it is a story of Chicago.
Tell the listeners who are from not in Chicago a little bit about WFMT, because I know they do a lot of classical music, but they also have the midnight hour, number of
That's right.
A lot of folk stuff. Just a little bit on them.
So 70 years ago, my father, James O'Reilly, who was a distinguished actor, was part of the team there. He was on the overnight shift. And he, along with Norm Pellegrini and Ray Nordstrand, they did programming that included our wonderful, wonderful sage, Studs Terkel. So it's a heavily cultural organization over there at WFMT. And the folk programming in the variety show is the Midnight Special on Saturday nights. And it's been 70 years. So I'm going to be doing a program for them that you'll be able to hear on May 20th, talking about Chicago studs and performing parts of In Old Chicago.
Well, this In Old Chicago, your new project for 2023, follows another project you just had, which was called Roots in Ireland 2022.
Thank you for mentioning that.
You want to tell us a little about that one? And
absolutely. Well, coming out of the COVID, we musicians needed something to do. And I was reading a fair amount on social media about how we should support small businesses, and particularly women-owned businesses. And so I went to a couple of the women-owned businesses that I know in town, and I talked to them. And one of them is the Trey Kroner restaurant, which is in North Park. Many people love it. And Trey Kroner has had their restaurant in the garden outside even through the winter. So I started doing garden concerts there that I called Roots in the Garden. And in the meantime, I found the journal that I had kept on my honeymoon, and it talked about Ireland. And I thought, what would be really good during this period of time when you're in grief and you're trying to restart your life is to go back and look at the roots from which you came. So I did Roots in Ireland with the plan that I was going to go to Ireland for the James Joyce Centenary, where my sister Bridget was speaking. But because of COVID and family things, I wasn't able to go. So I did it here. And I did it with J.R. Sullivan. We did a version of Ulysses here. And the Roots in Ireland project is started because I was looking at history and the history of the voice that the family has and acknowledging the incredible work that the Irish American relatives I have did here.
Well, one of the things that around this time, I'm not sure of the actual dates, but I know your mom passed away and your good friend Michael Smith passed away. And You did talk about musicians coming out of the COVID and, moving forward. Talk a little bit about your grief and how music saved you in a lot of ways, as it does many people.
Well, I've been an arts coach over the years, and you and I have been associated in a fair amount of projects from people that we know. So I like to put myself in the shoes of the people that are like myself. And for an artist to say, what am I going to do? And what do I have to talk about when we're in such tremendous shifting times? It occurred to me that I should talk about resilience. And so I started making a list of the things that I do on a day-to-day basis to help myself get through. And the first show I did was and is called Tough Broads and Tender Lasses. So I looked at some of the biographies of the great singers that we love, many of whom we know didn't have the easiest time, like Judy Garland and Sophie Tucker and Ella Fitzgerald and Mahalia Jackson. And I integrated them into the show. And the theme was Songs of Resilience, and kind of have done both of those programs, off and on in Old Chicago and that one, to show people that through singing and through the arts, you can actually find your way and be inspired and inspire other people.
You want to tell our listeners a little bit about Michael Smith?
I'd love to. So for you Rogers Parkers, Michael was, a pretty steady act at the No Exit Cafe over many years. And I was his musical partner for almost 30 years. And together we created 5 shows and about 7 records. But mostly Michael was really a songwriter for himself. And he just really believed in reading. One of the things that's great about him is that you'll find many of his songs are based on great works of literature. And of course, Michael, he did Grapes of Wrath, but he also did things based on Oscar Wilde and Robert Louis Stevenson. And I commissioned him several times for poetry from Gabriela Mistral. Shirley Jackson was an inspiration. So Michael was really literate. And in addition to that, as a pal of Stevie Goodman, he was one of those people that was writing songs all the time. And it's an incredible, incredible partner to have to just expand your mind. And he was steady with it all the way through. He died at 79. So good for Michael.
Well, what do you got planned coming up? I mean, you've got a long list of shows you've put together. You've got a ton of albums out,
Yeah.
and I'm just wondering, well, what's next, as well as what do you do when you're not singing? I mean, in terms, do you cook? Do you go to the gym? What do you, how do you keep your spirits up?
I'll answer the second question first, which is also, I'm a grandmother, and so I do take care of my grandchildren.
Oh, nice.
And during COVID in particular, I was cooking for people and leaving food on the steps. And I swim. That's what I do for exercise. It's really good as a singer. I write a great deal and I do research, but I would say that what's coming up next is that this show, the distinction about In Old Chicago is that it's becoming a multimedia piece. And I'm so proud to tell you that over 5 months, I have interviewed and talked to many Chicagoans and asked them if they have old photos of families coming here as immigrants, and collected those photos, and they're part of a video that goes with Sanctuary City. I've also done the same thing with my relatives, and I have pictures from our family dating back to the early part of the 1800s. And that accompanies another song called She Would Sing the Carrie Dances, which is about my Aunt Dorothy, who also lived in Rogers Park. And it's a favorite song of my fans. So I will be continuing to do the research and collecting the images so that eventually the whole show, there's 18 songs, will be accompanied by these incredible pictures that I've been collecting and the stories that go with it. And then hopefully, if enough people get on board, I want to do workshops for other people, other artists who tell me their family member passed away and they left all this stuff and they don't know what to do with it. And I want to talk to people about what you can do with it and how you can make a legacy from your own family stories, which you do, Michael. So you know that story.
I like finding out that you're a swimmer. I have 2 shoulders that don't work anymore, crashed them, and I won't go into detail, but I've been for the last couple of years on a real regular basis, 3, 4, 5 times a week, going in the pool and just running in the deep water. And I know how helpful it is for an old guy, 81. And I know that swimming is a great thing, and I'm glad that you're a supporter of the aqua movement, so to speak.
Well, another thing is that musicians like me, we count. So, when you're doing reps or whatever in exercise, you become a coach over the years.
Yeah.
I did Middle East, right? When you swim, it's also the repetition and the counting process helps to calm the spirit and prepare you to sing, because we have to clear the palate. When you're a producer like I am, it is nonstop promotion, writing, research, fundraising. I've been an independent for 40 years. And I've worked, as you know, in many, many places in town. But I don't sign up for the big institutions because I don't really support that idea. I support that the artists get paid sooner and better than we are. So when you have something like water as a distraction, it's a great thing.
Water is really a wonderful thing. Without it, we would be nowhere. You had this really big family, and when's the last time you all got together? Do you ever do that? Do you ever all together?
Sure. It's been very sad and difficult because of COVID for the family, because the way that we spent our time in our childhood and all through adulthood was singing together. And I tell people the reason I sang harmony is because there were so many sopranos that sounded just like me. I had to pull myself out to make a distinction. And so we do it in little bits and pieces, and with my grandchildren and my daughter's families as well. But when we come together, it is very special. And we just celebrated my mother yesterday. She would have been 99. And my mother directed theater in Chicago up until the last few years of her life. She ran a senior citizen theater at the Cultural Center for 20 years. She was writing poetry and playing Scrabble the week she died. So we're really blessed with her in terms of our gene pool, and we really miss just getting together and singing. That's what we did. We didn't watch sports together. We sang together.
Well, Jamie O'Reilly, why don't moving away from music or including music, what are your hopes for the city of Chicago? And what might be some suggestions for the new mayor coming in who faces a number of challenges?
I think that what I watched in the last administration that frustrated me was that there was a lot of PR and promotion about a certain way to look at the city. And I don't feel, as a longtime member here, that our viewpoints are seen and heard. And that has to do with the people like you and me who decided to stay here. We have something to say, which includes that we wanted a fully integrated city. We wanted public services. We wanted to not be ticketed for 1 mile per hour over in front of a school, because I feel that the city still taxes the poor. And among the poor are independent artists like me who are doing community work. I think that our stories as community workers, and you do it, you bring as much attention as you can, and Marguerite does too. Our stories need to be heard, because I think there's a falsehood out there about people giving up. The truth is, we're a city of very strong-willed, dedicated people. And my relatives at the turn of the century were so involved in social justice. My great uncle Tuck was tried for sedition against World War I. He was one of the original Chicago Five. And they started the Hobo College, which was the first school for immigrants to study English. And my great aunt Mame helped start the teachers union. And my great aunt Nell was one of the founders of the School of the Art Institute students. So it's important for us to recognize that among us are people that are not celebrities and are not wealthies, but that we hang in. And there needs to be more of a context for people to understand that our work is our passion, and there needs to be a little bit more available for the people. That's my opinion. What do you think of that?
I like that. I mean, that's a rap that people could give in any city, in any place, but it's coming out of Chicago. It's coming out of Jamie O'Reilly. I like it.
Thank you.
Well, we got a couple of minutes left, and I'm going to let you decide what you would like to share with our masses of people listening or watching.
Well, I think what I want to talk to you a little bit about, Michael, is the family salon, because I host a salon called Root Salon. I started it in the early 90s out of my home. Now I do it at Trey Kroner Restaurant. And this is a tradition that was started. It kind of is like the Bughouse Square folks. So these were people, intellectuals and artists, who would get together in my family's home around Humboldt Boulevard in Cortland in the early 1900s. And the quote from the family is that they were Fenians looking for support for Free Ireland movement and people fleeing the Tsar with missing fingers. And they would come together and they would find a way to speak to each other and to celebrate. And so I found that in the research. And then just up the street, a few blocks north, I'm continuing that tradition. And for those of you who don't know, the idea of the salon is that it's about sharing in the artistry and the writing, but it's not about exclusivity for the performers. And also the reason I do it is because too many people my age and older talk themselves about going out because they don't want to go to a parking garage, they don't want to drive at night, they don't want to be with crowds, et cetera, et cetera. And so I made this available through the proprietors there as a BYOB situation for people that just are like really smart gatherings of people that are gifted without all the extra stuff that they used to have to do when they were young.
Well, that's wonderful. I'd love to know about that event. Maybe you'd let me show up one time.
Let me think about that. You always show up, Michael. That's part of what you do.
Well, Jamie O'Reilly, I'm really glad we got to do this. It was before I heard you on on Northwestern Station, WNUR, the other day. It was last Saturday or Sunday.
Yeah, Sunday.
But before that, I had gotten your email about your upcoming event, which I want you to repeat one more time. And I said, I got to catch up with that woman. And I did.
Thank you. And thank you all for your support of us, we artists. I'm going to perform in Old Chicago with my brother Christopher O'Reilly, Judy Kogan-Heikus, Victor Holstein, and pianist John Erickson on Saturday, April 29th at 7:00. You can go to my website for information. And as part of the deal, there is a cocktail hour before we begin, which is included in the price of admission. So come there and schmooze and see the beautiful art that this gallery is presenting for us as well.
So that'll be a week from this Saturday, the 22nd, on the 29th. And people want to know more about you, they can go to Jamie O'Reilly. That's JamieOreilly.com. And there are plenty of videos, etc.
Right. I say Jamie like the Irish boy. That's how you remember me. Yes, please go there. I've written quite a bit on my blogs, and you can read about Michael Smith's songs, which I perform quite a bit. And in this show, we have 5 of Michael's songs.
Jamie O'Reilly, it's great. I'm glad we did this, and we'll see you again in the not too distant future.
Thank you, my friend.
It was great having Jamie O'Reilly, and it was also good having Orrin Williams on the show. Next week, we've got people all lined up. We're going to have Mike Klonsky on. He does that show Hitting Left with the Klonsky brothers on a sister station, Lumpen Radio. I think he's on Fridays. And we're going to talk world politics. And I also have, and I'm really honored to have, Billy Branch, one of the greatest blues harmonica players ever. He'll be on the show. Coming up in May, we've got my daughter Koya Paz, artistic director of the 3 Street Theater, and Gordon Mantler, who has a new book out about the Harold Washington campaign. It's called The Multiracial Promise. So those are guests coming up. And we want to encourage you to do what Athletes United for Peace that's to do sports, not war. I want to thank all the people who make this show possible, particularly Hal James, our engineer, as well as my advisory board of Katie Hogan, Tom Clark, and Lynn Orman Weiss. So, with all that said, we encourage all of you to do good in the world, because the world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that we do together. And together we will make a difference, because we always have, and we will continue to do so. All power to the people.